You know, I think Project Moon has finally cracked the code to what makes Burn unique as an archetype. Sometimes it's not about making the status itself do a billion damage. When the chips are down and you gotta kill someone, the best way is to hit them square in the face.
곧 여명이 찾아오겠지.
가능형 사출. 전부 조각내도록.
꺾이지 않도록 거세게 피워라.
잡아주세요. 안전할게요. 사람만큼 패밀리도 너네들도 전부!
With the recent release of Dawn Office Faust and Gregor, I feel like a lot of us slotted them into our existing Tremor-scorch teams without a second thought. At least I did. Yeah, how'd you like that eject, thumbboy? Anyways, I think it's kind of unfortunate losing both Office Gregor and LCE Faust in what I consider to be the best iteration of the Burn team, especially because of how much of a potency demon LCE Faust is. I'm certain that the Dawn Office trio are a direct upgrade to their predecessors, and hey, what do you know, they're actually a blast to play. Dawn Office Sinclair in particular was one of my favorite Burn IDs before he got shifted out of the meta. There's something about Sunset Blade's animation that just feels so snappy and satisfying. Overall, I'm pretty happy with this development. In my opinion, Limbus Company is the most fun when you're making meaningful decisions every turn, in terms of skill rotations, ego resource management, maintaining a stack, and setting up windows to nuke enemies. It's useful to know exactly what each of your identities do for that reason. To optimize is to engage with the game's systems. You wanna think of it, that's probably also why win rate is frowned upon. Making this video is my way of forcing myself to have that second thought. I think these IDs are pretty cool, man. I want to talk about them. This is gonna be like maybe a half guide and half deranged ramblings, with also maybe like a pinch of team building section at the end, and also 2 large eggs, 3/4 cup. As a disclaimer, I'm not all that familiar with the meta of Limbus Company, so some of the advice I give later on might literally be bullshit or misinformation. I have recently completed Railway 6 using Dawn Office in Section 3 and 5 though, if that means anything for my credentials. Let's start with Faust. She becomes conditional by racking up stacks of Fire Butterfly Coffin, gaining bonuses on her skills for every 10 stacks with the caveat of applying Self-Burn. Hitting enemies with coins on her base skills increases Coffin by 2, and her skill 1, 2, and 3 increase Coffin by 4, 6, and 8 respectively on use. Her skill 2 gains up to 2 reuse coins for every 10 stacks of Coffin, which means that it generates more Coffin at higher stacks. You get more Coffin per Coffin. A similar principle applies to her skill 3, which also has reuse coins. At 30 stacks of Coffin, Faust upgrades her skill 3 and power counter to their empowered high noon versions. Both of these skills are unfocused volleys that hit for an amount of damage roughly equivalent to the amount of pain the average warp train passenger suffers. Faust's empowered counter resets her Coffin stacks and heals her, but her empowered skill 3 doesn't, which means that you can actually use these two skills back to back, as long as they aren't used on the same turn, in which Faust's weapon begins to overheat. I like to throw out a basic version of her skill 3 to get Coffin stacks faster. You can still get both reuse coins at 20 Coffin, and I'm pretty sure Dismemberment does more damage anyway. Come to think of it, it does have that missing HP conditional I've been neglecting to use. The basic skill 3 also doesn't have the unfocused volley tag, which can sometimes make her high noon skills finicky to use on enemies with multiple parts. Something you might overlook is that once per encounter, Faust's defense skill gives her 6 Coffin for free on combat start, Her skill 3 can't take advantage of its own 8 coffin gain because it's an on-use effect, meaning Faust has to be at 30 coffin in the first place to turn it into an empowered skill 3. But because the defense skill gains coffin on combat start, a cool trick you can do is use the defense skill at 24 or more coffin to get a dismemberment on the same turn, though it can only be done once. In any case, you want to be using either of Faust's empowered skills as soon as possible, as they give Faust the Battle Instinct status, which is really good for 2 reasons. Look at Faust's burn and tremor count application across her skills. This chart assumes that amplitude conversion into Scorch has already happened, which subtracts from your burn count whenever you burst Tremor. With 2 bursts on her conditional skill 2, and 3 bursts on her empowered defense and skill 3, she makes up for the count loss by inflicting the same amount of burn and tremor count on simultaneous or earlier coins. As a result, Faust is pretty neutral for count. However, having Battle Instinct adds a ridiculous amount of burn count across Faust's skills, making her mostly positive. Now, the other reason you want Battle Instinct is because it raises Faust's speed, allowing her to go first with Everlasting on nuke turns. Do you see what I'm getting at here? Tremor burst heavy egos like Everlasting and Crushbound Past have the unfortunate side effect of making your burn count catch strays, because the egos themselves don't inflict burn. Even though burn is a nigh immortal status that only drops when the enemy has already metamorphosed into a smoldering corpse, I'd argue that Faust inflicting more burn gives you a lot of leeway in bursting Tremor as many times as you want, especially on Tremor IDs that don't inflict burn. Okay, now before we talk about Gregor, let's take a moment to talk about follow-up attacks. When Dawn Office Faust has her Feuer Falter passive, she uses her skill 1-2, second to defensive, as an unopposed attack after either Dawn Office Gregor or Sinclair use their skill 3s, or whenever they stagger an enemy. Conversely, when Dawn Office Gregor has his Morgan Feuer passive, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, he uses his skill 1 as an unopposed attack when Faust and Sinclair use their skill 3s. What's really fun is that both of these follow-up skills are burn and tremor count positive, which means that even though Faust and Gregor's skill 3s are mostly count neutral, no they aren't. The damage from these follow-ups really start to rack up over time, and they even generate additional ego resources. This will become very relevant later. What you should probably consider is that these follow-ups allow Gregor and Faust to stack their unique status effects an additional time, though I'm not sure there's ever any circumstance where you're hard-pressed for a whopping 4 stacks of coffin. As it turns out, I don't have as much to say about Gregor as I do Faust. Salvador Gregor buffs the Dawn Office trio simply by existing, giving everyone 3 offense levels and some SP healing every turn. It's very nice for consistency in the first few turns of the Reflect Real Railway Roulette when no one has sanity. Gregor becomes conditional when he reaches 20 or more stacks of Light of Daybreak, which increases his burn application and adds a coin to his skill 1 and 2, with the additional coin on skill 2 also bursting Tremor. On hit, Gregor gains between 1 and 4 Daybreak based on the enemy's burn potency, getting the maximum increase when the enemy is burning for 9 or more. When Gregor's combat passive is active, he gains an additional 2 Daybreak on hit if he has the Dawn Herald effect given by his skill 3 and its variants. His power counter also comes with an assist defense that grants 5 Daybreak, but hitting enemies with the coins themselves do not grant any stacks of Daybreak, as it only increases with base attack skills. Reaching 30 stacks of Daybreak converts Gregor's skill 3 into Crack of Dawn, and I'll be damned, it's just as beautiful as the day we lost it. Sorry, I'll never do it again. Crack of Dawn is interesting because Gregor, like Faust, can issue it on demand with his defense skill if he has max stacks. What that does to a skill cycle is that you don't need a skill 3 ready by the time you've hit maximum Daybreak, as long as you can clash with the enemy. As such, you can use Gregor skill 3 early in the game to get your first amplitude conversion into Tremor-scorch, then use the following turn of Dawn Herald to stack up to 30 faster. However, doing so means that you can't use Crack of Dawn on an enemy that is already staggered, or one that staggers before they can clash with Gregor on the same turn. Converting Gregor's defense skill into Crack of Dawn also still gives him assist defense, so if he's faster than the enemy, leaving an unopposed attack to trigger Heat Haze after Gregor has used Crack of Dawn gives him an extra 5 Daybreak to help his ramp up. Lastly, let's take a look at Gregor's status economy. All 3 of his skills are slightly Tremor positive and Burn positive, and he ends up doing a lot of burn count when he's above 20 stacks. He ends up inflicting a lot more count than he actually bursts, so you can pretty safely throw out his attacks without worrying about losing your stack. Overall, his kit is a lot less complex than I initially thought. I don't think the buffs to Dawn Office Sinclair really change his playstyle that much. Faust's High Noon buff grants Sinclair speed, clashing, and damage, while Gregor's Sunset buff helps with Sinclair's survivability and consistency, with an extra 5 SP gain on top of the Dawn Office buffs, and also making it so that his SP loss mechanics don't bring him below 25, making it impossible to naturally exit the Wax and Pinion state. These buffs get stronger when Dawn Office Gregor and or Faust are dead. Overall, they make Sinclair into a pretty competitive modern unit. Burn itself is a very consistent but low damaging status, so using Sinclair's High Noon burn activations helps even it out a bit, making him kind of like a miniature House of Spiders Ryoshu for the burn team. TLDR, you want to get Sinclair to 40 or more SP as soon as possible by winning clashes with his weaker skills. Use Fierce Charge if you want to gamble, and Sunset Blade for consistency. Alternatively, use Sinclair's Harmony Ego. Having the Sunset buff makes this a lot easier. The only new addition to this strategy is the presence of Scorch Field, which counts burn damage dealt similar to Blood Feast. You need to field both Gregor and Faust to make use of Scorch Field, as the Sunset buff summons the field and the High Noon buff allows Sinclair to actually use it, consuming up to 100 Scorch Field with Blazing Strike, and converting it to damage percent for a surprisingly substantial amount of hurt. It might be worth noting that Gregor's skill 3 burn activation, as well as the pitifully small additional wrath damage that Sinclair gives to his seniors, contribute to Scorch Field. Now, is it worth killing Faust and Gregor to turn our nuclear baby into a coughing bomb? I think the question we should be asking is whether or not it's even feasible to intentionally let the other two die. They have enough healing to keep going for a while. I'd use the second round of buffs more as a failsafe than a win condition, if anything. Okay, now let's talk team building. I think it's worth mentioning now that the Dawn Office units ought to be run together. Between Gregor's Dawn Office buff, the follow-up attack chains, and the buffs that Gregor and Faust both give Sinclair, even missing one component of the trio is going to make them weaker. Don't get me wrong, Gregor and Faust individually are pretty great standalone units, especially with Faust being such a good user of Everlasting in the context of Trevor teams. That just leaves Sinclair. He's still an alright unit without the suspiciously High Noon-shaped wheelchair, but I think he's the least future-proofed out of the trio. In any case, I would rather pair him up with Faust over Gregor if you have Harmony for the SP passive, and Gregor over Faust otherwise, if you want an idea of who you should prioritize sharding. Assuming you have an optimal account, your team would probably look something like this. The 3 Dawn Office identities, the remaining Thumb identities, and 1 flexible slot. Yeah, boring, I know. For said flexible slot, use Faint Aroma Ryoshu for damage, LCCB Ishmael for comfort, and Magic Bullet Otis if you have a steady supply of Ego resources. Out of these 3 units, the 2 you don't end up fielding can be used as backup. If running a House of Spiders Ryoshu strategy locks you out of using Heathcliff and Rodian, or you just don't own them, swap them out for IDs that can inflict a lot of burn potency, like Liu Yisang and Senki's Dawn, because you can convert that into Tremor potency using Mersault's Capote Ego. If you do end up replacing some of your Tremor units with your burn units, you can make up for the loss of Tremor count with Faust's Everlasting Ego, or by fielding Faint Aroma Ryoshu, or LCCB Ishmael as mentioned prior. House of Spiders Ryoshu is also a decent backup ID, because by the time she gets fielded, both Rodion and Heathcliff are probably dead. If you don't own one or several of the Dawn Office IDs, I would replace them with LCE Faust, Fire Fist Gregor, and Thumbclair respectively. Fire Fist Gregor is less of a must, because this team doesn't really struggle with burn count when Dawn Office Sinclair is present, so I might swap him out for Liu Yisang for the Capote Potency strategy. Mao Faust is also decent if you're planning on spamming Everlasting. So hey, there's a surprising amount of breathing room in this team. If you're missing a significant amount of the IDs mentioned, I'm sure a good percentage of the other burn or tremor IDs can fill in for units that you don't have. Just know that this team has a somewhat tight burn economy without Dawn Office Sinclair, which kind of clears up when Faust gets her Battle Instinct. And also don't forget to inject as much tremor count as you can into this team, because a lot of its members are barely tremor positive. A friend told me I should probably have included a guide to using this team, which I kind of forgot to include when writing this script. I think it's mainly because the Tremor-scorch team has a relatively simple playstyle. In any case, here's my best attempt at summing up what you should do. Start by adding burn and tremor count to the enemy until you reach a comfortably sustainable stack. Then, use any of your Tremor-scorch unit's skill 3s, which are all wrath skills, to trigger amplitude conversion on the tremor stack. You should worry more about keeping your tremor stack high because Dawn Office inflicts a lot of burn count on their own. After this point, just remember that those Wrath skill 3s I mentioned are your main source of damage, as most of them burst Tremor 3 times and hit pretty hard anyway. I'd say it's pretty easy to manage as a dual status team, though it takes a while to rack up your potency. So by the time you have a bunch of Tremor bursts lined up, they're probably not doing the maximum amount of damage. This is also why I mentioned Capote Mersault a lot. As long as you have good burn potency, you can mirror it onto your Tremor potency. It's kind of hard for me to comment on the overall strength of this team. As far as beating Railway 6's Terminus goes, it was faster than my bleed team by a couple turns, so its damage against bosses with multiple stagger thresholds is comparable to the old reliable spam Fluid Sac and Sanguine Desire on loop. What I can attest to is just how fun Tremor-scorch is as an archetype. You have so many nuke skills in EGOO, it could put entire countries to shame. I really like this new direction for burn. Being able to do something with your excess burn count is something I've wanted for ages. Anyway, that's about all I have to say. I might make another video if this one does well, who knows. If you enjoyed watching up to this point, maybe consider dropping a like and subscribe.
Wait, you're not gonna talk about Magic Bullet Aldous at all?
Huh?
Actually, why aren't you using her in like any of these clips? Don't you have a fully built Magic Bullet with her signature ego?
Okay, I lied. This isn't a video about Dawn Office, and it isn't a video about Burn either. Let's talk about LCCB Ishmael. Yeah, you didn't think I'd bring up this team's tremor count problems for no reason, did you? Quake rounds, +4 tremor count, 16 tremor potency. Everyone is conditional by turn 1! Season 1 identity design, baby! Just like Mom used to make. Ishmael doesn't do any damage, you say? Where do you think Otis's damage comes from? See, the damage that Otis does with her skills is actually somewhat minimal. You run her for the express purpose of applying Dark Flame on the enemy. Dark Flame actually racks up pretty quickly if you use her ego, and for the longest time, burn teams had to scramble for Pride resources to fire it off consistently. So with the new units, we have a lot of Pride resources, don't we? Yeah, of course. But you know what we don't have? Wrath resources! Rodion, Merso, Heathcliff, Faust, Gregor, and Sinclair generate Wrath on their skill 3s. These same Wrath resources that are used to give Sinclair his burn infliction and Faust and Gregor's follow-up attacks, which are also at odds with the ego resource cost for Harmony, Capote, and Crush Ground Past. On top of that, Dark Flame's damage is reliant on burn potency, which this team isn't very great at generating, is it? But by the time it's fully stacked, the enemy is usually, already dead! To be fair, Magic Bullet does generate her own Wrath resources, something which LCCB Ishmael doesn't even have. Let's talk about what she does have! Quake rounds, +4 tremor count, 16 tremor potency, Gloom resource generation! You know, the Gloom resources that you need to fuel Everlasting Faust! Look, this team may generate a lot of pride, but it also generates a great deal of sloth, and also a little bit of gluttony from Faust's skill 1-2 that no one on the team really uses. But that's besides the point. What is Ishmael gonna do when she runs out of ammo anyway? Christmas Nightmare is an Ishmael ego that costs 2 pride, 4 sloth, and 1 gluttony. It bursts Tremor 3 times and goes +2 in Tremor count. At thread spin 1, in exchange for losing 2 Tremor bursts, this ego increases Tremor count by 4! Okay, I think I'm done. LCCB Ishmael also applies 5 same turn fragile on her skill 3, which shouldn't exist in a world made by God, and it's an example of mankind's unlimited hubris, but she doesn't have a good speed range to actually take advantage of it. You know, maybe I should just shard a Faint Aroma Ryoshu.